minutes here for people to pop on and join us here on Facebook this morning. Today, we're going to be talking about Minnesota trees and timber and learning a little bit more about the forestry industry that is such an essential part of the state of Minnesota and how that is tied into agriculture. In your resource kit, everyone should have received a Trees of Minnesota book from the Minnesota Forest Industries. And that book has a lot of really great information identifying the differences between our trees and what they're used for after they're harvested. So a great resource that you can use in your classroom or even in your own home, or maybe while you're on your family vacation to some of our national forest grounds that we're lucky enough to have here in Minnesota. As you're joining us this morning, if you want to go ahead and drop your favorite forest product into the comments on the Facebook feed, that would be neat to see what your favorite thing is that you get to use from our forest products. Again, as you're joining us. So today's tour is going to look just a little bit different than what we've had in the past, as we actually went out and pre-recorded our forestry footage just to help ensure that we were going to have good video. It wouldn't be raining. The piece I didn't think about is how awful the deer flies are out in the woods right now. I can't say that I'd be able to go wander around and take good video for you right now, fighting the bugs that are out there. So it's going to be a little different. It's pre-recorded footage of Duquesne logging, doing some harvesting on the majority of it's a private landowner sale. And Joe Duquesne is with us today to narrate our tour. And then we'll have little segments where our video will stop and you'll see our Minnesota Ag in the Classroom logo, where we can take a moment and ask some of the questions that you're sharing in our news feed as well. So with that, I think we're gonna go ahead and start moving into looking at our land of 10,000 lakes, as we all know it, is also the home of 2.2 billion trees in our Minnesota forests. Believe it or not, the Forestry Division is the oldest division within the Department of Natural Resources, and they actually existed a generation before that organization became the DNR. So that was kind of neat. The history traces back to the large wildfires that happened in the 1800s and early 1900s. Forestry is such an integral part of our state, as almost 1/3 or 33% of Minnesota is forest ground and home to 53 native species of trees. So again, a lot to be learned in the forest, whether you're looking at the trees itself, what they do to help clean our air and water, and the extra things that they provide us for shelter for our wildlife, maybe windbreaks for our cattle, windbreaks for our homes and yards. So with that, if we want to go ahead and head out to the woods, maybe, as we would say, we'll go ahead and get started. As we arrive in the woods, you're going to see some blue marks on the trees marking the edge of the timber sale. And we will learn a little bit more about that after a little bit from a county forester who's just on the road yet, and will be popping on for us here after a little while. So Joe, if you want to go ahead and hop on and tell us what we're looking at here as we're arriving into the logging site and seeing those blue marks marking the boundary of the tree sale that would have been set up with a forester before you arrived.
This is our Woods Road. It's a private landowner that had the state forester come out and set it up for him, tell how many cords he has, and they take a small fee for doing that. But the landowner actually lives in Iowa, and this is his hunting land up here. So all these little blue marks in the trees are the boundaries, and this is like the road is a boundary, but they still mark it.
So while we're getting started, people are more than welcome to please add in your questions into our Facebook feed. But Joe, if you maybe wanted to give just a little bit of history of your family and how they got started logging and how you got involved in logging yourself.
My dad started logging back in 1969, and I started in helping out when I was in high school, graduated in 87, and kind of been with the business all my life so far. Dad retired 7 years ago now. So it's just me, and I got two crews, got the link crew and a conventional crew, and as the video goes, I can kind of show you what the difference is on how the operations work, where you're dragging trees full tree length through the woods, or you're just picking them at 8-foot lengths at one time and pile them on the landing. So.
And what schooling or background did you have going into the logging business?
I never went to any school. I just always rode in the truck with Dad, and had been in the woods. Just did high school, didn't want to go to college or anything. So.
And I think
kind of like logging, being in the woods, outdoors.
And I think that's part of the importance of bringing ag literacy into our schools right now is post-secondary education does have a place for some students, but maybe not for all. So that if we can expose this to kids who are interested in some of these hands-on, more technical type careers while they're in school, we're helping them be successful in a career path that they're maybe choosing down the road.
And all the machines are getting computerized all the time now, so you basically just in here pushing levers, and you got a computer screen on where you're going and the boundaries, and it's getting easier until you break down.
Right. And just one of those good parts of maybe the importance of some of those computer and technology type classes as well, so we can work on and manage some of that new technology and equipment that we have out there today. Looks like lots of people on Facebook are feeling very thankful for the paper, especially paper to make books to enjoy, which doesn't surprise me at all. For those who maybe saw, I added in, I always think of baseball bats. When I think of products that come from the forest, I am from a family who loves baseball, and so having a baseball bat being able to be made out of the forest is a huge advantage for me. So I'm going to see here. Carrie, I'm not seeing our video. It's like stuck on the Ag in the Classroom logo. There we go. So if you want to go ahead, and we're at the landing here now, and Joe can pick it up from there on what we're looking at.
So this is our landing where the trucks get loaded, and the markets were all over the place because of the COVID. So we have more wood piled up than we normally do on this particular job. That's our dozer there. We make roads and landings and whatever else we need to do, push trucks if it gets soft. And then we also can clean up trails and stuff once we're done with the property. If he has existing trails and we've used them dragging wood down and they get a little out of shape, we can shape them right back up, so it's good hunting when we're done.
And I'm assuming that there are some rules that you have to follow as far as how you go about leaving the roads or setting those up as you're coming into the logging site.
All the roads need to be in as good or better condition when we leave as when we started. So most of the time they're better because they're smooth and everything else. When you got the dozer right there, you can shape them up pretty good. Otherwise, it's a little, almost like a four-wheeler trail, woods trail when we start on a lot of them.
And I would agree, your team does a phenomenal job leaving the forest looking outstanding when you're through with your part of the job, that is for sure.
So this is our track filler buncher here. That's aspen we're cutting. We're leaving the pine in there. Aspen hardwood we're cutting. Aspen's, a lot of it went to Norbord to make OSB board. Some went to Sappi to make paper. And we got to separate the hardwoods just because they can only mix so much in at a mill to make their products. And we can just pick up the dead ones as long as they're live enough to use. The one I just picked up there, and then you a lot of times you snip the little trees just so the regen comes back better as you're going through and taking the big ones that you can use. So then when it's all done, it's pretty flat and the sun can get in there and the regen can start over.
And for those who maybe aren't real familiar with the process, having the regen would mean that the trees will actually start growing again on their own from the root system of the trees that were harvested, and actually will start to grow the forest again all on their own. Not that there isn't times that we need to go in and plant trees, but it is part of the natural forest cycle to have those trees start back up again on their own. Why don't we go ahead and explain a little bit about the head and the blade on the machine while we've gotten a couple good looks at that.
So that blade's about 4 feet in diameter, 1.5 inches thick. It's spinning at 1100 RPMs all the time. So you're basically catching the tree as it's cut off before you grab it. If your teeth do get dull, it'll stop it, and you just gotta be careful and watch your gauge and how fast it's spinning all the time, but it's cut some trees off in split second. So there ain't much for chainsaws or anything being used in the woods anymore, just to trim loads.
And I know you said the other day on what size that blade was and how many teeth are on there.
There's like 22 cutting teeth on it, around the roughly 4 feet of blade there.
So a really big saw in comparison to when logging started back in the day and people were cutting them down with an axe. I mean, it's really come a long ways, which is a phenomenal journey to follow if you go look through the history of Minnesota logging.
I never had to use an axe to cut a tree down yet, but I did cut some down with a chainsaw. And before this saw head like this come about, there was a shear head where you just drive up and the cylinders pinch the tree off. But that was ruining the butts, and especially in the wintertime, it'd crack them up. So mills didn't like it. And this saw spinning all the time, it's sped up the operation a lot.
So I see on Facebook we have a question on how much land can you clear in a day. So if you want to do that, but I think also a good time to maybe talk a little bit about the difference of like select harvesting, what you're doing on this site compared to clearing a site as well.
This machine is used on our conventional logging site for, like right now you're looking at a skidder dragging up the wood, and the machine with the big boom on the top, it'll grab the tree and strip all the branches off it. Then we re-pull it up to the slash or to cut it in whatever lengths we need to. That when I'm cutting, I can cut roughly an acre an hour, I figure, which that just depends on how thick the wood is. If it's 30 cords or whatever, and that's a clear cut like you were looking at. But if like that machine doing the cutting that you've seen is mainly used in the clear cuts, where we have a different machine to do more select cutting, and that's when you only take about a third of the wood out, just to get sunlight in there to get it to grow better.
So we've got a couple, yep. So Joe, we've got several questions for you from Facebook right now.
Okay.
Maureen would like to ask you, what are mature birch trees used for?
They're just mixed with the aspen and the mill to create the board paper. Every mill uses them. I think it's like 7% they can mix in hardwoods or pine.
Okay. And then Joan is asking, do you ever burn off the underbrush when you're done removing trees? She's heard that it can help stimulate new growth.
We have not in a pine stand. I know the DNR and federal, they'll burn a pine tail to try to get the pine cones to open up to reseed, but like aspen comes back really thick when you cut it. So, you know, a lot of the brushes run down and stuff, but you know, your small aspen shoots come off the roots and it's really thick. And over the years, it kind of thins itself out on its own.
And then Karen is asking, is there a time of year that is better for cutting down trees or for logging?
Once the ground freezes, it's always better because you can cross swamps, you can make roads across the swamps, and you don't have to worry about in the summertime you get rained out a lot because there's a rut. You cannot make ruts with your equipment out here, and I think the standard is nothing over 4 inches. Otherwise you're supposed to shut down, and you know, once it gets muddy, it slows progress down anyway, so it ain't really worth working when it's wet out.
Okay.
In the summertime, you're doing a lot of moving and you got to make sure your roads are good to get in and out. Wintertime, you can go pretty much anywhere.
And this is not a question, but Stacy really wishes you could come to her lake property with your machines here. I'm going to go ahead and play the next video. And Sarah, I think you have some questions for him to answer about the next video.
As we're transitioning, I know one thing that a lot of people don't realize, if you wanted to touch on maybe Joe, is how the Minnesota road restrictions also play into the time of year that you can move around equipment and get to different sales.
That's where a lot of the wood is cut in the wintertime in Minnesota, because once middle of March, the road restrictions go on, and they call it breakup, where everything's muddy anyway and the roads are thawing out. So we can't haul during that period on most of the roads. So all the mills try to fill up all winter long, and then once middle of May comes, they lift restrictions and the mills just kind of buy a lesser amount, enough to keep running until the next winter season. And we can haul like 90,000. We get permit to haul 90,000 on our trucks in the summertime and 100,000 in the wintertime. So you do get a little extra hauling ability there. And when the restrictions come on, then it's a lot of times you can only haul like 70,000. So it's not worth it to haul very far. And that spring thaw time.
Looks like Aaron's still driving, so we're going to let him keep going that. Why don't we talk a little bit about who else is on your logging team per se? Like, how many employees do you have? What does it take to keep all of the equipment running and do your job?
Well, we got 2 skidders out there, a limber and a slasher. So besides the buncher in the woods on this job, and I normally have 5 or 6 trucks hauling off of it, trying to average about 15 loads a day. That just varies on the mills a little bit too, but in the stand of wood, because then we got low boy trucks to move. You're doing a lot of moving in the summertime because the jobs aren't as big either. And that's just because you can get into an area and in the wintertime and it's you can just bounce around and not clear cut. You can just checkerboard type areas and it don't look like a big field when you're done anyway.
Can you explain that a little bit more, Joe, what you mean by picking and choosing or not cutting everything?
The foresters will have they got reserve patches they're required
Joe,
to leave.
Your thumb's in front of the camera.
Oh.
Okay, go ahead, continue.
There's the foresters need to leave reserve patches, and some of them just, you know, you'll come into a road, you drive a mile into the woods and you cut 20 acres here, and you drive another half mile and you'll cut another 15, 20 acres, and that's the federal guys do that a lot, where it's not one huge cut unless they want to start over on trying to plant pine or spruce. They did cut 60 acres off last year. That was pretty much leveled so they could plant a different species that was native to that area, I guess. Because nobody likes to see a 100 or 200 acre just clear cut with no trees left when you're done. Wildlife included. You know, you're looking to have some birds and deer cover and everything else.
So Maria asks, are there restrictions on, I think what you were just kind of talking about, it might also have been earlier when you were talking about the summertime need, like having to keep the ruts from happening. She asked, are those restrictions from a federal or a state level? I guess do you have regulations from both federal or state?
It's federal. No, it's state. It's the state of Minnesota that kind of sets the guidelines, but pretty much everybody follows them, counties or.
Sure. We have 4 more questions for you. They're really good here. Rochelle is asking, how large of an area do you log in Minnesota and how many mills do you haul to?
How large of an area?
Mm-hmm.
All the timber sales come up on auctions, you know, whether it's sealed bid or oral. Most of the time, unless you run across the private landowner that you can either put it on bids or just talk to a Pacific logger. That happens once in a while, but I usually travel about 100 miles sometimes, north, east, and south. I don't go to the west very far because it gets to be further away from the mills. And was that kind of the question, how far I go or how many?
And then how many mills do you haul to?
We haul to Norbord, Boise, Sappi, Blandon, Potlatch, and then there's some smaller ones like the Reamer, the Savannah Pallets, and Cast Forest Products. So we're spread out quite a bit, but probably 75% of our wood goes to Norbord and Sappi.
Okay. Sarah, do you want me to ask these 3 other questions now, or do you have something you'd like Aaron to talk on? He appears to not be driving.
He is ready. So we will, Aaron, I'm going to have you answer these next questions as they kind of pertain to how the sales get set up. So I'm going to take a moment here and I'll introduce you to Aaron Funk, who is a county forester for Hubbard County, Minnesota. And he is who set me up with Joe. And as you can see, he's on dad duty today and had to deliver his kids to swimming lessons. So Aaron, if you wanted to just take a minute and explain a little bit on how the logging sales get set up and you find the logger and decide what kind of wood's going to be harvested and where and when.
Sure. So mainly, like with the county, we have inventory of all our acres, and And so we've set up a cut plan on cutting different species in different areas of the county. And as Joe had mentioned, those sales then get put up on public auction that different loggers come and bid on the different sales that we have. So we basically will pick an area that a lot of it is based on age. There's also the factors of storm damage. Sometimes we'll go and try to capture some of that storm damage so it doesn't just all rot down. But once we pick a site to go out to, we'll go and appraise it. We'll walk the sale. We'll try to GPS the amount of acres that we're going to cut in that area. Some of our inventory is from many years ago, and a lot can change just with the storms and tree growth and drought and whatnot. So once we pick the area and we'll get it GPS for acres, we'll go take plots throughout the sale and get an appraisal of X amount of corn. Hey, boys, sorry about that. So once we come up with a volume of wood, and we have the price just based off our last auction. Back up here. And we'll put that up for bid. We'll mail it out to different loggers. Then we'll have a public auction. The previous auction we had was actually a sealed bid auction, just based on the whole social distancing thing. But then the loggers will have a expiration date on that sale. So after, sometimes it's winter only sales, they're only cut basically after November 15th, and will be done by March 15th. Summer sales, basically, if it's not in that breakup time that Joe was talking about, we don't really cut anything in that spring breakup time, just because both the roads and the woods are not really conducive to logging. With private landowners, I mean, it's kind of up to them what they'd like to do with their property. Going out with them in the woods is one of the best ways to kind of give them some options on what they can do with it. There's been some attempts at thinning some aspen stands, and those haven't worked very well. There's usually a lot of blowdown after that, so it would make a little better sense to clear cut some bigger chunks in those areas, multiple chunks, as opposed to trying to do selective trees. Like the site in the video here, if that's showing up on everybody else's, I mean, their goal was to basically remove the aspen, and they reserved a bunch of the bigger pine trees that will now come back really thick to aspen. It's already, I'm sure, sprouted back this year, but by next year there'll be a lot of aspen regen throughout that whole site. I should maybe be muted again for a little bit here, and I'll answer more questions if you have them.
So Joe, let's go ahead and go back to what we're looking at there on the video, and to kind of just finish connecting what Aaron was saying and what you were saying before we went to him, of you have the rules that you have to follow for cutting the trees. Are those the same for the state and the federal level, or do those vary dependent on where you are?
They're all pretty much the same. Their big thing is no rutting. The federal has a little more touchy rules on be sure not to cut this cherry tree or something like that, because they have a lot of people looking at all kinds of different habitat that is out there, and make sure it's good for everything. And there's certain trees that they want left, and so they'll put X's on them and really stress that you do not touch them. Basically, where like on a sale like this, we're saving all the pine trees, but sometimes they'll get smashed or something by the aspen trees we cut, and then we just end up using that pine tree because you don't want a broken one up there to get the bug started in any pine trees or nothing like that. There's a bark beetle that will kill them. And that's not a big deal. You just pay the landowner for miscellaneous pine where you get in the different places. You got to report it and do all these other things.
So
Jill?
let's talk. Oh,
Oh,
go aid, Carrie.
Sorry, got a question here from Kim. What's the most challenging and the least challenging tree type to log?
Aspen is probably the easiest when it's a pure aspen stand. Hardwood always slows you down. It's usually forked and crooked and not as long. Like those are birch trees. They're small.
What are we watching in this video happening when it goes into that machine and then comes out?
That he's taking limbs off the tops. So
And
instead of a chainsaw cutting limbs and tops off, you have that machine that just grabs them, and there's rollers that'll suck it in. And
What's that machine called?
it's a delimber.
Delimber. Okay. And then one more question for you. Has the demand for logs increased, leveled out, or decreased in recent years?
It is kind of goes up and down a lot because it's some years you could sell, say, balsam and spruce. It's tough to sell it right now because we just had the Verso mill in Duluth shut down. They took a lot, and because the schools weren't in session, like the Blandon mill makes paper, and so did that Verso mill. That's really affecting how much wood they buy. And just the paper in general it's decreasing, so that causes mills to close. And it was really good as far as selling whatever you wanted to up until March there this year, but now you pretty much got to check with everybody before you open a big sale, make sure you can get rid of everything.
I would say probably an industry that most didn't think of being affected by the COVID pandemic would be the loggers. I mean, you're out in the woods already social distancing from others, but not thinking about that you still need somewhere for your product to go. And with all the distance learning and the less paper being used, how that really does affect you and your business.
Yeah, it affected pretty much every mill we went to, even like the OSB board. When it first started, nobody was building big projects, and now it seems like everything's starting to come back with, the potlatch makes 2x4s, and like Sappi, they send a lot of exports out. When they stopped the ships from going, they had to shut down for 5-6 weeks this spring too.
So I'm noticing in the video that the delimber is cutting off all of the tops and stripping the branches. What happens with all of that material during logging?
That either gets piled up so they can burn it, or it gets spread out in the woods and driven over just to help the soil. But it's a little messier for the first couple of years until it starts to rot and to walk around in when you spread all them tops. Up until it was like 2 years ago, we have a chipper where we could do biomass, but all the markets disappeared on us, so we cannot chip the tops anymore. So we can't have a perfect clean site anymore.
And as we're going back here, watching the buncher again, taking down some pretty big trees. How big of trees can you cut with that machine?
What was that? I had somebody calling and interrupted here.
Oh, no problem. I said, as we're watching here, harvesting down a couple of bigger trees individually there, how big of trees can you cut with that machine?
22 inches is the size the head is rated for, but when they get over that, you can notch them on one side and just go around to the other side and tip them over a certain direction. So you can pretty much cut 40-inch tree if you really want to, but you basically tipping it over, you're not picking it up and carrying it and put it in a pile at that point. And this job is getting pretty close to being done.
So we just tried to capture kind of a panoramic 360 view around this site so you could see what it looked like. As Joe said, this project here is just about completed. But how phenomenal the trees that are left in such good condition where they'll really be able to thrive and grow now with the additional space. And we'll have that regeneration of those aspen trees coming back in shortly thereafter. And, you know, like Joe said, they have to leave the site as good or better than they came into the woods. And I think that that's something that all of agriculture truly works day in and day out to do, is to always leave our resources better for the next generation than how we found it. Much like, you know, Joe being a generational logger, he was able to pick up a business that his dad started years later and continue to move forward because of their good stewardship while they were out in the woods. So let's go ahead and move on to the next piece that we're looking at here. If you want to go ahead and tell them what piece of equipment we're looking at here, Joe, and what its job is on the site.
This is what will load the trucks or put it in a pile, whichever we're doing at the time. That everybody.
And how much wood? Yeah, I can still hear you. How much wood do you pile in each pile? Like, how do you decide how to do that?
That's just depends on how much room we have on the landing. You know, like that saw right there is 72 inches around with 40 teeth in it, where you can take a big bundle of wood, and it's a half-quart bucket, so you can basically load a semi-truck in 20 minutes.
Joe, we've got some questions. Maria is asking, have there been any new markets emerging for logs?
No. There's, you know, you might get a little specialty product here and there, you know, like Ashland mats come about probably a year and a half ago. They're making them pipeline mats, so they're looking for wood, but that's takes special wood and it's out of state and everything, so it makes it a little tougher.
Okay.
No markets have come about in our area for quite a while. They've been disappearing more than they creating.
Sam would like to know how often you have to change blades.
Like all the teeth are you can, like these ones are riveted on there. You just pop the rivet out and put a new one in there. There's a little tool for that, and you don't have to. You just kind of keep replacing the ones that you might hit a nail or something and take a couple teeth out here and there, or a frozen knot in the winter will take some teeth out, but we never have a specific time that we just replace them all, because they don't totally get dull without breaking off. They have little carbide tips that'll break off, and you just put a new one on there, which probably takes not even 5 minutes a tooth to change. So
okay. Lori mentions that she had a great grandfather who was a logger in northern Minnesota, and unfortunately he was killed by a tree following him in the 1800s, and is just remarking that logging looks much different now than it did back then. I know your dad started your logging company. What changes have you seen, or what changes have there been since he started?
Well, when Dad started, he cut down all the trees by a chainsaw and cut them up in 8-foot lengths by a chainsaw. So it's come a long ways. Even when I started, we had like the buncher, but it couldn't cut a very big tree. So your hand falling some bigger trees once in a while on a sale. But probably in the 90s, then you got into the saw heads, and you got these big circle saws. In that 10-year period from about 92 to 2002, they made big steps in production of logging and safety and everything else. And nowadays, all they're doing is putting more computer stuff in there. I think in every machine that you'll get a light on, some sensors out, so it'll shut you down. You got to have a dealer with a laptop come out and figure out what's wrong, because everything's high tech anymore.
Sure. Anne Marie is asking, are there any log home builders that you work with, or furniture builders? And if yes, what are they looking for when it comes to the logs?
I haven't. Log home builders don't buy a whole lot of logs from. Don't take that many logs to build a log house, I don't think, because I've left some wood on a landing one time in my life for a log home, and there was probably 40 or 50 trees off this guy's property, and log home builder took all them trees and built them a nice little log cabin for a hunting shack up there. But other than that, they just, I haven't really heard of too many people specifically cutting for a log home. You get a stand of bigger pine trees, and they're kind of looking for that area, and they'll go to the guy and just buy a few trees too sometimes. So,
Sarah, I think we've got a couple of questions for Aaron, or if you want to have Joe talk about this video, or Aaron, you just let me know where you'd like to go next.
It looks like Aaron had to hop off. I'm assuming he had to take his kids into lessons. So I think we had a question here, Joe. I don't know if you want to touch on it, on how often and when do trees get replanted that are from an area that have been cut?
That how often they get planted when we cut, I think they're running a pine stand up to like 100 years, about 25 to 30 years they do a first thinning. This is the machine that we use to thin trees, and then every 15 years or so they thin it out, and then when they get so big they cut the whole stand and replant it. That'd probably be a better question for Aaron, how they determine to plant some areas like in the pine too. If they don't think the aspen's going to come back good, they'll convert it over to pine.
We do have Stephen, who is Aaron's brother, right, Sarah, and your brother?
Yes,
answering some
correct.
questions. He just gave a pretty good answer to that question on Facebook.
So maybe we'll just go ahead and continue on, because I do see that he did do that as well. So if you want to talk a little bit more about the thinning process and that machine, as we're looking at that and watching the tree fall over.
So this machine it's just got a chainsaw blade on the head. It'll cut the tree off, cut it into 8 foot or whatever length you want it. It can get around in the woods really easy for a big machine, and we'll have a forwarder come along and pick up the trees, the piles of wood right behind them, so that you're not skinning up trees, dragging them tree length through the woods.
And approximately how old are these trees that you're cutting down here?
I think these ones are a little over 30.
So here we took some footage just of the piles of the logs and looking at the ends of the logs specifically, where you can use those tree rings to identify how old they are, and then just the comparison in the different species of woods that are piled here. So if you want to go ahead and share a little bit more on that and how you have them staged for hauling them out.
This was a Norway plantation, like 60-year-old stuff that was in that conventional logging job. That little pile of Norway right there was cut by the processor before they moved in. But the rest of the aspen was like 80 years old. It was almost getting to the point where it's too rotten and falling down, and this little chunk of pine had to be planted by whoever many years ago because it was only 6 acres in the middle of everybody. So, and most of the aspen, I think they're shooting for 60 years old to cut it. Some been trying to cut it at 40, 45, but it gets to be a little bit small. And it's all paid by weight, so then it's a little bit lighter too than the bigger stuff for some reason. Here is the same a different operation, but the same concept for the slasher. Instead of piling the wood on the ground, he's putting it directly on the truck to take to the mill.
And
Elaine?
I think, oh, go ahead, Carrie.
Elaine is asking, how many years does it take for an aspen to regrow to its same size after it was harvested?
It to be worth cutting aspen has to be at least 40 to 45. But
40 to 45
years, yep.
years, okay.
But like a lot of these trees that you see in the video are older than that, but they're stands that weren't cut when they were supposed to be cut to have maximum production and quality wood, I guess.
So I think Aaron's back on. Before we run out of time, we did have a question on how you decide to replant after an area has been logged and what species would go into that.
Sarah, I don't see Aaron.
Oh, he said he was back on, so I wonder what happened. Well, we'll just keep moving then.
Oh, he is here. I'm sorry. Hold on. He's coming up. So go ahead and share what the question is for Aaron. Maybe he'll be able to hear you.
So we're looking at, as you log the forest, how do you decide what species to replant and what is the process of doing that?
Okay, am I back on?
You are.
Yes.
Okay. So it kind of depends on each site. There is a native plant community that you actually can go through and look. It's basically the understory underneath the mature trees, and they'll give you a good sign of what would grow well in that site. We can kind of move that bar to whatever we would like to put in some of these sites, but obviously some sites are going to be better for a jack pine. The next site might be better for spruce. Some of our issues on what we're planting where is based off of the deer populations. If the deer are too high in an area, it's just really difficult for us to plant any jack pine or white pine. We have bud capped sites before, and that's helped quite a bit. But as far as the reforestation, I mean, it's, for a while there wasn't as much call for the jack pine as there was for red pine or Norway pine. So we we're putting everything back into red pine. We had jack pine budworm that really took a toll on a lot of jack pine in Hubbard County. And so some of those sites we also put back into red pine, even though those sites probably should have stayed into jack pine. It's kind of a site by site, I would say. And it's a little bit, you try to play to the call of the mills. I mean, we're looking for the future as well. Not only, we have to be able to move the wood, but we also are looking for some wildlife benefits. With being on county lands, it's more than just the wood fiber production of like the potlatch or company owned lands.
So as we're nearing our end of time today here, I just want to thank both Aaron and Joe for taking the time out of their day to hop on and share a little bit about their jobs with you, as well as to Stephen for helping handle questions on Facebook. If you guys have any last closing things you'd like to share, otherwise we're going to wrap up so we have our break before our Zoom breakout sessions happen next.
I don't have anything to add, I guess.
All right. Well, thank you so much for letting us tag along, and hopefully we can follow the journey of where our trees go next on a tour down the road. So for our teachers, if you want to go ahead and take a break, and then we'll be hopping over onto our group Zoom right at 10 o'clock and looking at our lessons and having some experts join us in our breakout rooms there today as well. So thank you all so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.